are sticking with the 1,500 as the minimum health and safety. But I think one of the things that we're factoring in when we're requesting the information from our contractors is the 50 gallons per capita per day, but also the fire, needs for fire suppression on top of that.
Okay. And then dust suppression, concerned about air quality impacts. So is that included, or are you working on gathering that information as far as what would be needed for dust suppression?
Yeah, that's probably more specific. I'm thinking that the example is more specific to the Central Valley project side, and that would not be included in our calculation of the 1,500 yet. That's how we're still trying to assess what volume we might need and flow rate we might need for that number.
Okay, and then if you could walk us through the consumptive use and the delta, and what you mean by that, and how that caused challenges with salinity at one point, but then it seems to have been reduced and helped to meet the standard, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Right. Okay. So the outflow, delta outflow is a calculated number. So it's based on the plus side is the inflows into the delta. So it'd be primarily Sacramento River, the San Joaquin River, east side streams, McCollum, Cosumnes, Calaveras coming into the system on the east side. The negatives on that would be the exports and the delta consumptive use. And so there's the delta consumptive use is not something that can be measured directly. So it is kind of an assumed number. It is, so there's a gross channel depletion, and then there's gross channel depletion is assumed to be offset by precipitation that occurs. And the reason that Stockton Firehouse is picked, it's assumed that any precip that occurs at that location occurs over the entire delta region. And the assumption is that the volume of runoff associated with, or let's say repression of consumptive use, is distributed over a 5-day period, that runoff will occur over a 5-day period. So that any precip that occurs counteracts this consumptive use that is a different value for every day of the year. So the assumption is lower consumptive use during the winter, of course, and higher consumptive use during the summer. But that part of it is the big unknown. So when we run the salinity model, the inputs include all the known factors, which are the gauged Sacramento flow, the gauged San Joaquin flow. We know what the exports are. One of the big unknowns is what's that black box, the consumptive use in the delta. So it's just an assumed number. If conditions as they are this year, extremely dry through the winter, hasn't rained hardly at all in the last 12 months, 13 months, is there actually, higher consumptive use than is assumed, which is probably a good, it's likely it's higher. It's just that we don't have a good idea what that is. So that would throw off, if we're operating to a certain outflow, as measured by the equation, the actual outflow could be a lot lower than that if we've underestimated that consumptive use. So it's a long explanation. Hopefully it made sense.
And there would be, I imagine there'd be changes to that calculation if there were curtailments.
Correct. We would assume there'd be changes. I don't think we'd have a good handle on the magnitude of the change that would occur. But, yeah. So the other order terms was establishing the Real-Time Drought Operations Management Team. You have a panel on that. You have an agenda item with that panel this afternoon. Conserved water calculation, I did talk briefly about the fact that we do believe there was some water savings from the petition, even though the 7100 was met because of the precip. The projects, we both feel that we would have made additional releases from upstream had we not had a pretty good understanding we would, you know, that we were not going to, the 7100 would not apply. And I think we don't have, we feel it's in the tens of thousands of acre feet at this point. It's a little bit tricky to get at an actual number because you have to make assumptions on where the water would have come from, whether it be Shasta, Oroville, Folsom, and the lag times come into play. So we're still kind of working through that, but it looks like it is in the tens of thousands of acre feet of savings for that first week of February. There's a requirement for monthly water balance estimates. So we're working towards that. That fits pretty good into our routine process for collecting the runoff forecasts based on the snow surveys. We receive those in the second week of the month. We then run that through our operations models. So, for example, currently both projects are running through those operations models this week. So by next week, we should have something to be able to post. We will be posting it on a DWR website and linking that to one of the board sites. The other part of the order was to increase the modeling and monitoring to inform the real-time team. And I think Kevin Reese will touch on the increased modeling increased monitoring, the fish monitoring that occurred for the as part of the DCC opening. And the salinity modeling is another piece of this, and we're trying to refine the model to better reflect the actual conditions that we're seeing. So we're doing some calibration there to help inform the real-time ops team on making better decisions on these trade-offs that we have between the cross-channel gate, the upstream releases, and the water quality needs for the M&I users in the Delta. And that's...
Question. You anticipated one of my questions already with respect to the posting of the monthly water balance estimates. Will the conserved water calculation and any additional increased monitoring information be made available as well?
We can certainly make available the the estimates for the water savings and how that fits into this water balance estimate. That can certainly be part of it. As far as the I'm not sure what information we have. I don't think we were planning on posting anything on the monitoring, but we can take a look at what we might have available for that.
Thank you.
I wanted to add just a little bit too on the conserved water calculations. It's not a very easy number for us to come up with. For one, you're asking what would we have done in the absence of the TUC, and that's almost like asking us, well, which reservoir would we have killed first? Because we had a number of reservoirs and serious problems. So that's not an easy decision or something I think we can make. And depending on which reservoir we choose, it's going to change the operations and change the estimated amount. If, say, we selected Folsom, things could be much more efficient, and we might come up with something, 10, 20,000 acre feet possibly. But if we have to select Shasta and say we want to put Shasta at the most risk, then that number could easily rise to 50, 60, or greater thousand acre feet because of the travel time required and the buffer needed to operate the system that way. So it's not easy, and it's things that we would have to consider in this hypothetical operation as well. Do you want to rely on Folsom? Folsom might be an easier reservoir to refill and recover from a drought, but the consequences of not doing that can be much more severe than maybe some other reservoirs. So when you ask us what's the water conserved, it could be it could be this, it could be that, and it depends on what you want to assume.
So if there aren't any more questions on our presentation, I can turn it over to Kevin Reese from our Division of Environmental Services, and he, as part of his talk, he has some more information on the increased monitoring effort.
Good morning, members of the, can you hear me? Okay, good morning, members of the board.
Much better.
Okay, my name is Kevin Reese. I am the acting program manager for the Office of Regulatory Compliance. Today I'm going to speak just a little bit on the Delta Crosstown Gates, the matrix that we came up with and some of the reasoning behind it. I'd like to start by saying that this occurred in response to a request from NIMS on, I think we actually met on Friday, January 28th, the team. It was an interagency group of fisheries biologists. It consisted of NIMS biologists, biologists from Reclamation, Department of Water Resources, and the California Department of Fish and Game. We developed an operational plan, a working draft, so to speak, for the Delta Crosstown Gate operations. And this was in consideration of the need to provide minimum health and safety supplies, conserve water for later protections of in-stream uses, and the need to protect the endangered winter run Chinook salmon. And on that last point, I would like the board to know that we did consider both the juveniles that are moving down in the system now and also the need for cold water pool for the adults that are moving up now and that will be spawning this summer. So that was taken into consideration. This is, and I don't have a, since you don't have the ability to see the screen, there's only about 3 graphs or so that I'll point your attention to, and the rest I'll try to cover in just speaking. So.
Thank you. You can use your hands if you want.
Okay, I'll do some waving as well.
Swimming and stuff.
So for the outline, I'm going to start off with just the quick triggers that we're using, the sampling locations. I'm going to speak briefly about the location, the timing of the juvenile winter run in the system now. I'm going to go over the catch indices that we use, the current NIMS DCC management operational matrix, and then some revisions that are being considered. So again, this all came about in a matter of hours. Again, on January 28th, the group of scientists met. We met for about 5 hours on Friday afternoon and developed this matrix. It is a working draft, so we tried to get something that was in place that would be usable for that upcoming weekend and last week. The team is meeting regularly to refine these, so I just wanted to point that out. And initially, this did focus on winter run because, again, that was the initial concern of NIMS when we put this together. So just real quickly, the sampling location. So for this matrix, we use Tisdale Rotary Screw Trap, which is about 90 miles above the DCC. It's very, very far north on that map. You won't see it. Knight's Landing is just off the top of the map, and that's about 60 miles above the DCC. And then we have the Sacramento Trawl, which is conducted by Fish and Wildlife Service. And then we have the Sacramento Seine sites, which are the stars on the map. So all these sampling locations are well above the DCC and are all meant to provide early warning to what we're likely to see in the next day or two. Don't really need to look at this graph. I mean, this chart, it's really, really busy, and I was just going to put it up there to pull apart some take-home points from this, most of which are, if you look at over all the years, in about 58% of them, over 75% of the winter run arrived by the end of December or the first week of January. In critical and dry years, 72% of the winter run entered the lower Sacramento River by the end of January, and 92% are seen by the end of February. So in most wet years and years with early flow pulses, in November you'll see most of the fish. In years where you don't see the flow pulses, they tend to hold upstream and then move down later in January and February. And again, as of 2 weeks ago, before we had this first rain event, we had seen very, very little passage. The thought was at least 70 to 70+% of all the winter run juveniles were still upstream of Red Bluff Diversion Dam. So we knew that they were upstream. We knew that something would get them going. So we knew we had some protection time, I guess a window of protection available to us. And again, this is in the change order too. So. this, I just wanted to point out somewhat how the fish respond to pulses. There's been quite a few studies that have looked at this. It's in the salmon decision tree. Some other work has been done. A report by Del Rosario and others in 2013 looked at about a decade's worth of flow and catch data at Knight's Landing as well. And so what you see is generally around, when you get a first pulse of around 7,000, you really start to see fish migrating downstream in the late fall, early winter. And then when you have pulses in the 10 to 14,000 range, you really get even larger pulses moving down. And then as you can see on this one, by the end of March or so, by the end of March, we basically had 100% of the winter run past Knight's Landing. And again, this was a somewhat protracted dry year, so that they showed up a little late in 2009, but it is something that we were expecting to see this year as well, with a pattern similar to this. Now this is a similar chart to what you might see in the Del Rosario paper, and we took the data out a couple more years, and so what this does is this looks at the arrival, so it's a cumulative proportion of catch at Knight's Landing, Rotary Screw Trap, the Sat Trawl and Sains, and then also at Chips Island. And the main point I wanted to point out on this one is basically by the end of April into May, most of the fish have left the system, the winter run juveniles. So they come in over a pretty big window, but then they do really have a really narrow window when they leave. And they pretty much every year we do see this repeating pattern that by May they're exiting the system. Now we don't have information currently that I have graphed out that talks about the travel time, what you might expect to see from Knight's Landing down to the DCC. There are some acoustic data sets from acoustic studies that have been done by the USGS. We have some by the Army Corps of Engineers, and then the Southwest Science Center from NITS has done a winter run acoustic study last year, and they currently have fish in the system for a study that was started on January 10th. So we are looking at that data over the next couple weeks to try to actually look and narrow down the movement rate and put that into basically, some relationship to flow so that we can kind of judge, at a given flow, how quickly the fish might be moving from point A to point B. So we are working towards that. We just haven't really been able to get through all the data yet. And so at these sampling locations, we do have, they're based on catch indices, and so I just did want to point out that these are just estimates of the number of fish that are caught in a day, so a 24-hour period, and that this estimate serves as a metric of fish density. So sometimes when you see, you have a catch index of 1, you may think that that's really low, but it really does represent a much larger population than that. So, and where these are used at, the first one is up at Tisdale, so we do have a catch index of greater than or equal to 3 winter run. And these are just heads up alerts, so these are kind of, you have fish moving down, and within the next few days or week, you'll expect to see them entering the delta, so be wary. We also have a flow increase in there, which is similar to one that's taken out of the NIPS buyout at Wilkinson Slough. We didn't put an actual specific flow value in there because, once again, we knew that winter run were holding upstream. We knew they were likely to come down, and we didn't want to set a specific flow threshold that had to be met. We were just looking for a good size increase in the flow, and that would get them moving. So that's why we went with a 45% increase versus a 7,500 or 10,000 flow. And I just wanted to point out about whether or not these alerts are working. The Wilkinson Slough alert was tripped on February 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. And the Tisdale was triggered on the 10th, 11th, 12th, 14th, and 16th. So we have been meeting these alerts, and they are working. Now, ones that actually result in actions to the DCC, we have the Knight's Landing Catch Index and then the Sacramento Index. The Sacramento Index is actually made up of beach seines and trawls. We have a low index of greater or equal to 3, and that was calling for a 4-day closure because, again, we thought that would be indicative of a fairly small pulse of fish moving down. And then we had a larger catch index of 5, which would result in a 7-day closure, being protected for larger pulses of fish moving down to give them more time to pass. And then knowing that these fish do tend to reside in the delta for a while and forage and hang out, we did come up with some catch indices for trawl and beach seines upstream of the DCC. And so if we have really low catch indices of just 1 or 2, then that would result in diurnal operations to try to provide some protection to the fish that would be milling in the area, but also provide some water quality benefits if possible. So we really did try to balance this and to give some leeway to the operators where we thought we could. On that last point, I would like to, no, that's it on that one. Okay. So this graph, and this was one you might want to notice, the bottom line is a catch index of 3, and the top end red line is a catch index of 5. So I just wanted to show that, again, you do see these pulses move down with the flow pulses, and the catch indices do tend to capture most of them. There's a few that trail off in late March, the smaller pulses, and obviously a catch indice a little bit lower may have been more protective of those fish. And again, this is something we are reevaluating to make sure that these catch indices numbers that we are currently using are the best ones possible and provide both protection and the flexibility that everyone's looking for. And then on these triggers, it was mentioned earlier that the DCC diurnal operation trigger was hit early on. Basically, the SAC seine triggers were hit on the 8th, 10th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th, so we have been hitting that quite regularly. The SAC trawls, the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th, so again, we are picking up fish in the area of the DCC. And the Knight's Landing was tripped on the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 16th. Now, again, when we designed this, the kind of thought process was that the fish would be seen in an upstream and downstream pattern, but we did, recognize the fact that the rotary screw traps, they're not perfect, they have low efficiencies, and there may be periods where fish are getting by, which is why we did develop the other triggers. And in this instance, sure enough, fish got by the Knight's Landing screw trap, but they were picked up in the seines. So once again, we did actually provide the coverage that we were looking to provide, so it did work out. Just a real quick on increased monitoring efforts. Typically, the seines and trawls were done 3 days a week, and those have been increased. You see the range there of 5 to 7. There's a little bit of a ramp-up period to get started, so we didn't quite get 7 days a week when we first started, but currently the trawls and the seines are occurring every day of the week, and the data is being reported in the afternoon, around 3 or 4 o'clock. The Knight's Landing and Tisdale traps, they in the past have run 24/7, but they were only checked once a day. And then there are certain stipulations with debris loads, and if you catch listed species, you had to pull the cones. The regulatory agencies have been working to make modifications to those trapping protocols. At present, they are allowed to trap 24 hours a day. There is still certain stipulations for pulling the cone during high debris loads, and I do believe they are still limited to, I believe it's a catch of 5 listed species before they have to list the cone. So again, this does bring up certain questions when you're using these monitoring locations to provide this warning, but then you do catch those listed species, so then you have to stop monitoring. Then obviously you then use your ability to have that information. So it's a fine balance, and we all are really working really hard to try to make it work out.
Yeah, I'm glad you're working it. Then it became necessary to destroy the village to save it, kind of thing. So, right.
Exactly. It's a nasty catch-22. And then just real quickly, I just want to talk on the diurnal operations. There are some title components on that, and I really wasn't going to go over much of that today. I just wanted to let the board know that we really did think about diurnal options. We looked at the studies that were available, some from the Department of Water Resources, our Georgiana Slough study. We looked at some from Russell Perry. We looked at other studies from USGS as well, and we really tried to pull apart where the protection was, and it does appear from the data that you have about 3 times more entrainment into the DCC at night. Fish are moving more at night, so that is why we did call for daytime operations. Again, we did put some other caveats on the operations to try to maximize fisheries protection, looking at only maybe taking the water on the ebb tide versus a flood, and we're still working through that, but to be honest, we're not sure if when we get to that much fisheries protection, if there's any water quality benefits to be gained by those type of operations. So we're still working through those scenarios right now.
See.
But I did want to let the board know we are working through all those different types of scenarios. And then there are some revisions that are occurring. Again, this team is meeting weekly, if not more so. One of the things that we are doing is currently this was designed for protection of winter run. We did add hatchery winter run into that, and we are moving to older juveniles as a class, which is similar to what the buyout has. And then the other potential changes, like I was saying, we're looking at other diurnal scenarios. We did find out also that when we put the matrix together in a short time, and that there were some scenarios that got left out. So we went back and we tried to fill in those scenarios. You know, if you don't see a fish at Knight's Landing, but you do see it at the sack trawl, what do you do? And then we're also looking at development of some physical data that we might be able to use as potential off-ramps for operations. Instead of just having the Knight's Landing catch data, there might be some good environmental variables that are saying, you know, you're not going to have fish in this area of the system, or at least this many would probably move past that. So therefore, you may be able to look at different operations. So we're really branching out on what we're trying to look at here. And then I would just like to close up quickly and thank the other members of the drought operation team, Garwin Nip, Jeff Stewart, Colin Purdy, Krista Serta, and Josh Israel. And again, this just goes to show you that we do have a group of people from across the different agencies working on this. People in the middle, Chris McKinnon, Leah, Brett Harvey, and Garner, that worked really hard at the end of last week to pull some large data sets together for me to try to get some of these slides put together. And then I'd really like to thank all the sampling crews and the coordinators that really busted a move to get out there and get on the water and be out there in not favorable conditions and get this data. You know, some of the data is being reported at 9 o'clock at night, and these were, you know, sites and field crews that are coming back after long days and getting this crunched down for us and out to us. And so I really do want to extend my appreciation to all those hard workers. And I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you for the presentation and for that thank you to all the hardworking folks who are working on this. Questions? Right. Moving on. Thanks.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Well, it looks like it's a good afternoon, members of the board, by a few minutes. I'm Mark Holderman. I'm representing Department of Water Resources. I'm the chief of the South Delta branch and Bay Delta office. One of the things that our branch does is annually installs the rock barriers in the South Delta. We do that. We've been doing that for well over 20 years. And that's done to protect ag diversions in the South Delta. And I'm waiting for some applause from John Herrick from South Delta Water Agency. There we go.
Thank you.
He
I've
appreciates
been
that.
monitoring his face at various times this morning.
Well, I'm going to be talking about the drought bears, which is a little different than what we're used to doing. But although it's new to me and a lot of my staff, it's not new to the department. We've been installing drought barriers back in the 70s, the 76, 77 drought. We haven't since, but we did do a 2000. Why don't we have slides up? I'm sorry, wait, I don't see any slides yet. There we go, emergency barriers.
You put Monument Valley in just to get us used to the idea of a dry
Of a drought,
landscape.
right, that's the Delta in a few years, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully not. Okay, let's see. Let me get this working. Okay, so we did a study back in 2009. This was on the tail end of a protracted dry period. We didn't install any barriers, but we did have this study that we looked at this time around to see what was looked at back in 2009. That drought emergency barrier study looked at what we did in in the 70s during that drought, which is on this slide here. We installed about 6 barriers in the Delta, as far north as Sutter Slough, and as far south as San Joaquin River Barrier down by Mossdale. And most of these barriers were installed for water quality improvement. We did install 2 barriers in the South Delta, the Old River Barrier and the San Joaquin Barrier. That was primarily done for improving conditions for ag diversions. And as a coincidence, those 2 barriers, well, I'm sorry, the Old River Barrier is one we install under the South Delta temporary barriers, and that'll be done this year under just routinely, which will be begin next month. We also install a fish barrier at the Heddle River Barrier, and that'll be also starting installation next month as well, and that's to protect out-migrating salmon smolts. The 2009 report looked at several barrier sites, 2 in the North Delta, Sutter Slough and Steamboat Slough, 1 at 3 Mile Slough, 1 on West Falls River, and 2 locations that are comprised of 2 gates barriers. And these barriers were studied. They went through a process of screening various alternatives, either installing 1 or several of these barriers. That study, the initial study, looked at improvements in water quality and which various combinations of barriers, gave you the most bang for the buck. And out of that initial study, 9 different alternatives came out of that. One of the alternatives that we looked at in that second part of the study, which was then modeled to look at specific improvements to water quality at various locations in the Delta, and we also looked at the cost for those barriers to compare benefit costs of the various alternatives. But one of the alternatives that came out on top was this combination of 3 barriers, Sutter Slough, Steamboat Slough, and West Falls River. We also had another study that, or alternative that also looked pretty promising, and that again was the 2 barriers in the North Delta and the 2 gates locations. So those are the ones that we are currently looking at right now to see if using the current hydrology, if the same kinds of numbers in terms of improvements in water quality pan out for these barriers. And we have done some modeling this past couple of weeks to look at that, and the modeling is preliminary. We're doing some QA/QC on it right now, and but the improvements in water quality are definitely there.
For the layperson and the people who are listening, can you explain how these work, what the theory is?
Well, the theory is that you put some barriers on, in the North Delta, let's take that for example. If you put a barrier on Sutter and Steamboat Slough, you block the Sacramento River flow from going down those sloughs. And the water stays in the main stem of the Sacramento and also goes down, so more flow goes down the Sacramento, but also more flow goes down into Georgiana Slough. And if the Delta cross channel gates are open, more goes through the cross channel. So that brings a lot more water down into the central Delta. It mixes with the San Joaquin and then becomes part of Delta outflow to repel the salt. So the central and south Delta stay fresher by doing that. The gates in the central Delta there, on the 2 gates scenario, for instance, by putting one on Old River and one on Connection Slough, what you're doing is preventing some of the tidal flux from the bay moving as far into the central and south Delta as it ordinarily would by blocking that tidal flow. And by doing that, you're requiring the water from that salty water from the bay to take a longer route up the San Joaquin River and mixing with the fresher water, and because it's taking longer, and it's mixing more, your water quality is actually improved. So there's actually 2 reasons why we put these barriers in. Did that answer your question?
Just figured a lot of people didn't understand what the principle was, so
Okay.
I'm trying to listen for the people in the ether too.
Well, bottom line is it basically keeps more fresh water in the Delta and helps repel the ocean water. This is just an example of a barrier that we installed in the temporary barriers in the South Delta. This happens to be the Heddle River rock barrier that we installed to prevent salmon smolts from going down Old River. And so this is an idea of what a rock barrier might look like that we're considering right now. The gates that you see on the right side of that picture are slide gates. There's some culverts that are underneath the barrier that allow some water from the San Joaquin to flow into Old River to help, improve circulation. And we may have something like that for these drought barriers as well. Potentially three culverts. This is what I'm thinking. We haven't really fleshed this all out with our technical engineers. But for instance, we could have 3 culverts that are installed with slide gates on them, so that we can allow some water to move across the barrier, but also it might be useful for fish, not migration, fish movement past the barrier if that's necessary. But we also may use some other structures like flashboard structures or notches to allow some fish passage. There's thoughts of also including things like boat portage facilities, which 2 of our barriers in the South Delta, we do provide those. Makes the barrier more complicated, more expensive to install, and you have to have a person there full-time during the daylight hours to assist boaters across the barrier. So that's something we're going to have to look at as well, depending on the location. This is
just a question. Are there unintended consequences to the river or to other systems because you put in the barriers? I'm largely familiar with barriers on the oceans and coasts, and there really are unintended consequences that come from putting up barriers there. So I'm just curious.
well,
And also get closer to the microphone, because some of
Absolutely.
the people on the broadcast aren't hearing.
There will be changes in hydrodynamics. The water's always obviously going to move differently than it would absent the barriers. In the South Delta, when we put in the barriers, one of the unintended consequences there is that the diverters on the downstream side of the barrier suffer some loss of low water levels. The low water levels and the lowest tide get a little bit worse, and in many cases we've mitigated for that by modifying their diversions. So that could happen in the case of these barriers as well. So anytime you stop that tidal movement, there's going to be less flow going downstream of those barriers, and the water levels on that downstream side are going to be reduced. Whether or not that makes a difference to ag diversions on that part of the river, we will have to look at that. But that's one of the reasons why we want to have culverts installed, at least I do, to make sure that we can at least open slide gates if that's necessary. It may not, it basically punches a hole in the barrier, so it's not going to be as efficient at holding the water back and shunting that water down a different channel, but you got to, balance things a bit. So we'll be looking at trying to create a barrier that is relatively friendly to everybody that is in the area, including the fish. And this picture is one of the artist concepts for the Two Gates project that's been around for quite a while but hasn't really moved forward. And this is an idea of that still has merit for these drought barriers. What we could do is install rocks on either side of this gate structure, and so we'd have a rock abutment. And then if we had these great gates fabricated in time, we could install them, but it's not likely that's going to happen anytime soon. So what we could do is install sheet piles that you can see here on either side of that gate structure. Sheet piles in the channel, and then put rocks in the middle there where the gate structure would go. And then if we do have gate structures fabricated on time and we still need them, we can go back and remove the rock and put this gate structure in place. And that gate structure is a structure that's built on a barge that has a butterfly type gates that open and close depending on which way you want the flow to move. And so those would be towed out to the location. The rocks would be removed in the center, and that barge would be ballast with rock to sink it in place. So that's just another idea that we're considering. It's a little more complicated than just putting rocks across the barrier with some culverts underneath. So depending on the timeline for doing this sort of thing is going to kind of dictate what barrier alternative we go with.
I have a question on, and I can see there's a big difference between these barriers. There's some sort of low-tech and others that are high-tech and infrastructure intensive. So could you give a little bit of a sense of these, you're looking at 9 barriers right now or 6?
No, we're looking at either, under one alternative, 3 barriers. That would be Sutter Slough, Steamboat Slough, and West Falls River. West Falls River would be a very large one. And as a alternative to that would be, instead of the West Falls River barrier, we would put in the 2 gates locations, 2 barriers at those 2 gates locations, which would mean 4 barriers. So it's either going to be 3 or 4, in my view, unless somebody comes up with a better idea in a hurry.
Okay, and some information on cost and time frame for permits.
That's the tough one. Permits take a long time. Ordinarily, something like this would take well over a year to refine the design, to get the entry permits for with the local reclamation districts and landowners in order to put the rock there, and getting the permits through the state and federal permitting process to comply with CEQA and all of that. And we don't have that kind of time. Because these are part of the governor's drought proclamation, we're thinking that we do have some latitude, I guess, to install these under emergency conditions, which CEQA has emergency conditions. Even ESA, the Endangered Species Act, has emergency conditions. Whether or not these barriers will fit, we're yet to determine that. If we're able to do that and streamline the permitting process and the Endangered Species Act consultation process, it would just be a matter of getting the entry permits secured and getting them installed. So it could take a matter of a month and a half or 2. But the sooner the better. From I'm told from operations, the sooner we get them in, the better. If the delta continues to head south, literally, and that's because the saltier the delta gets, the more difficult it's going to be to bring it back. And if we put the barriers in sooner, then it stays fresher, and we won't have as much problem. But if the delta gets so salty that it's lost, then these barriers won't make any difference.
Thank you.
As far as costs go, the report that was done in 2009 has all kinds of numbers depending on the size of the barriers. Obviously, the bigger the barrier, the more the cost. The West Falls River barrier, for instance, is about 800 feet across. And just using rocks alone, it's going to be on the order of, if I recall, I don't have the report in front of me, but in the teens of millions, so $13, $14 million. And if you put a gated structure like this, then the price goes up about another 40%.
Interesting.
That's just another picture in the open position. So when those butterfly gates open, then it allows boats to pass, allows water to pass, and potentially fish as well. So that's the advantage of having an operable barrier. This slide just shows you some of the historical data and the projected data for precipitation in the past years. The 76-77 year obviously was our last big drought, and the precipitation you can see there. And the period 2007 through 9 was also dry, and that's why we also did that 2009 report. This year is the data up there is 26 inches. That's old data because that was just through the end of the year. So things have gotten a little bit better, but not a lot. And but it's still shaping up to be a lot worse than 76, 77 when we did put drought barriers in. And this is the last slide, just kind of showing you what we're doing right now with the planning for these drought barriers. We did complete the modeling. As I said, there is still some post-processing and QA/QC being done right now. But the preliminary data does show some salinity improvements in the south and central delta. So at this point, we're going to refine those alternatives, take those alternatives to the Real-Time Drought Operations Management team, also through to DWR management, and give them our recommendations. And at that point, we'll have at least the locations and the alternative that we want to go with, so that we can continue with the remaining work that needs to be done to get them installed, which is the permitting and doing the final design and that sort of thing. Any questions?
Great. Thank you. Any further questions for the panel? Very informative. All right. Are you all having low blood sugar moment, or can we go to the next panel? Thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it. It's a lot to lay out there. The next panel are the fish agencies. Question about whether you're hungry and want to take the break now, or how long you think the panel will take. I'm inclined to go till 1 but not beyond 1, because that seems unkind. So I'll wait for the fish agencies to have a discussion about what you would prefer. Go now or take lunch now? Why don't you caucus for a moment and then let me know.
Just after a brief huddle, it looks like we have about 40 minutes of direct presentation.
Well, and then we probably have questions as we go through as well. It's important, so it's, we could start now and then you come back after lunch too. Unless you'd rather streamline it, take a lunch break now and then come back and start. It's up to you all.
I'm hearing all at once, so a lunch break now and then
All right.
come back. And
We
do that.
will break between now and 1:15. Okay? 1:15 on that clock.